Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Talking with Teachers, a podcast of the Lamppost Education Initiative. I'm your host, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. And today, our guest is our brother, Sidi Mustafa Briggs, who we're going to speak a little bit about his bio before we bring him on. But Mustafa Briggs is a graduate of Arabic and International Relations from the University of Westminster, whose dissertation focused on Arabic literature and literacy in West Africa. Mustafa started an MA in translation at SOAS, University of London, with a specialization in Arabic and Islamic texts, before going on to Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, to complete another degree in Islamic studies and Arabic language. Mustafa has also frequently traveled to Mauritania, Senegal, the Gambia to benefit from the traditional Islamic scholarship there, in addition to his formal studies. He's right now currently in Egypt. He has been featured on international media such as Al Jazeera and Islam Channel to discuss themes such as Islamic history and Blackness and Islam, and is currently working on forthcoming translations of traditional West African Islamic texts, as well as having now published his first book, Beyond Bilal, Black History in Islam. So we'd like to welcome our guest, our brother Mustafa Briggs. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Talking with Teachers. Really looking forward to this discussion. How are you doing today?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to join you here today. Pleasure to be with you all on a platform that I've been following for years. I remember Lamppost Productions. I've been watching your videos and, following your conferences and all of the different amazing things that have been going on with your community for ages now. And then when I got married, I learned that my father-in-law is a good friend of yours as well. So alhamdulillah, I've been in the loop quietly, but now alhamdulillah, I'm out with you guys on the screen. Alhamdulillah.
Now, it's really a pleasure to have you with us. Of course, I follow your Instagram. You got some very good Instagram posts, a lot of good videos, very good quality, and so well-deserved attention that you're receiving. And I've been following at least your reports about your travels regarding your book, Beyond Bilal. Inshallah, we're going to talk a little bit about that eventually. But for the sake of the audience, we may have a lot of audience members who are not familiar with you. And of course, I read a bit of a bio about you. But who is Mustafa Briggs? I mean, in the sense, your family background, your journey, your educational journey, et cetera, things like that. How would you answer that question of who is Mustafa Briggs?
Okay, who is Mustafa Briggs? Very deep philosophical question.
But at the same time.
Yeah, isn't it at the same time? So Mustafa Briggs, Bismillah. I'm a young African boy from London, the UK. I was born in London, raised in London. And my mother was born in London, raised in London. So I guess that makes me second or third generation. I'm not sure, depending on which categorization. My father is Nigerian. He's from the ethnic group. He's from a state called Akwa Ibom in Nigeria, southern Nigeria. And he comes from a royal family in that area, in his area. I think everyone in Nigeria at some point comes from a royal family. Right. But his mother is Igbo and his father is Efik. He speaks Ibibio from that ethnic group. My mother is Gambian and Sierra Leonean with some Senegalese ancestry. So her ancestor, the most famous ancestor that we have in our family, or the one that we trace all our ancestry to in our family in the Gambia, is a Senegalese woman called Jojo Jau. And she came from also a royal family in Senegal called the Jau family. They were the kingmakers of a state called Walo, which is on the border between Senegal and Mauritania. She came into the Gambia to trade, and she married a man called Thomas Roberts, and he was from rated African stock. He came from the Gold Coast, so from Ghana. He settled in the Gambia. He married this Senegalese woman, and they had 4 children. One of them, William Roberts, married another liberated African woman called Khadija to Savage, and she gave birth to Thomas Roberts. Thomas Roberts gave birth to Marianne, who is my grandma, who gave birth to my mom. And so, we're mixed Sierra Leonean, Senegalese.
Mashallah.
Yeah. So we're a mixture of Wolof and liberated Africans who were freed slaves from the Americas and from the Caribbean who returned to Africa after the slave trade ended. So my last name Briggs actually comes from my mom. It's my mother's surname. My mother was traveling at the time that I was being registered, so my mother used her last name to register me. My dad's last name became my middle name, and then my mom's last name became my last name, and then I never.
Now, repeat your dad's middle name. What's his middle name?
So my father's
family. Wait, your dad's last name, but your middle name, you said.
Yeah, my father's family name is Okon, but what it is his grandfather, who was the king of their village, he was the Obon of his village. So his village is called Biaya Uruwan, and the Obon was like the king of the area of the village. His grandfather was called Okon, and he was the first person in our family to become Christian. And so when he became Christian, he converted to Catholicism. He established the first school and the first church in his community. And so when he registered his children for school, they had to register them with last names, and they didn't have a family name as such. Just know the son of this person, the son of this person, the son of this person. All of his children were known as the children of Okon, and then that ended up becoming my family's last name. But we don't really have a family name as such. We have like a common ancestor that we can trace. So on my father's side, I can trace my ancestry back 14 generations in that area. So like I know I'm the son of this person, who's the son of this person, who's the son of this person, all the way back to the person who founded that village. He's called Uruwa. Yeah, my father served that lineage. So our family name is his grandpa's name. So as a surname, I use my mom's last name, which is Briggs.
Mashallah, gives honor to your mom as well. Your grandfather's side and from your mom's family as well, right? So yeah, mashallah, that's pretty fascinating. I mean, I of course, a lot of Black Americans probably, will be in this to hear, such detailed sort of description of your origin, would like to have similar ability to actually call out, their roots in that particular regard. And I actually recently have received a lot more information about my family background. But still do some research because there's some skepticism about some of my grandfathers, my paternal grandfather's side, but I mean, it really does, do something different to the person to find out those type of things. And now, I mean, I didn't expect to be speaking to royalty today, but look at this. I'm lucky. Mashallah.
My dad is super big on that. Like he always, anytime he speaks to me or anytime he always tries to remember you're a prince. Remember we're from royal family. But we have no people. He still behaves that way. My dad still, he still acts like that.
So did you grow up with this knowledge, or this something that you, over the past few years, that you decided to, reconnect with this information?
I grew up with this knowledge just because I grew up with my grandmother, and I grew up, I grew up with my father and my mother and my grandmother. Because of where I grew up in terms of growing up in London and not being English and not being British and not really being a part of society, I feel like UK is completely different to America in the sense that when you're American, as much as you're born in America, you're American, or you can become
American.
Everyone's ascribed. Whereas with England, being English and being British are completely different things altogether. So you can be a British citizen in terms of you have the citizenship, but you're not ethnically English. You don't ethnically have ancestry or claim to the land. And when people look at you, like a common thing in England is when you meet someone, oh yeah, where are you from? And always say, oh yeah, I'm Jamaican, I'm Bengali, I'm Pakistani, I'm Indian. Even if your grandparents were the ones that migrated to the UK, you'll still connect to that ethnicity and that identity more than your identity as British. And then my grandmother's a very proud, I was raised by my grandmother, and she's a very proud African woman, and she always tried to instill in me that it was important for me to know where I came from. It was important for me to know my history. It was important for me to know what kind of family I belonged to. She was from a family called the Roberts family in the Gambia, and she's very proud of the fact that she's, a Roberts and what her family, etc. My father, same thing. I didn't grow up with my father. I only met him when I was 20, but I was in communication with him throughout my childhood. And because of that absence, he always tried to kind of fill the time that we did speak to each other with me to be able to know his side of the family as well, which was another side of my ethnicities. I remember like when I was about 6 years old, my dad sent me like a family tree, and he sent me like a description of my ancestors, and he'd sent me like, all this information. So I was going to school like, yeah, my granddad's a king. And do you know what I mean? And I had all of that in my head from a young age. And so for me, it was always fascinating. And I think that's what kind of pushed me to the direction that I went in, because my history was so different from my reality. So if I look at my historical documents, I came from all of these interesting people in these interesting places, faraway countries. But my reality was I was just another, young black boy in inner city London. So the kind of dichotomy between the two was always something that challenged me or pushed me to know more. Because if I was in a society that didn't value me, a society that didn't feel I was important, a society that didn't prescribe any kind of social standing to my skin color or to my ancestry, coming from a family that did, the dichotomy of those two things was like, okay, well, if I'm not important here, let me look at where my family placed their importance and see, on a global scale, why is that important there, but it's not important here? So that's what kind of got me into geopolitics, into, well, if we're from there, how did we end up here? All of these kind of questions that I had is what led me to the kind of person I am. But it's something I've always known. It's something that's always been in the back of my mind. And there's something that, for me, I took more and more interest in it as time went on.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah. I did your mother ever remarry? Like after, I'm assuming that her and your father, they got divorced, and so she never remarried.
She never remarried. So I'm an only child from my mother.
Okay, so you were raised with your mother mainly, you would say, So would you say that? Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you had siblings too. Maybe. Or I'm sorry, you said you're only child. You already clarified that. Yeah, but okay. So would you say that your education or your upbringing was somewhat religious, or how about, like, say, your religious education? When did that start for you?
So I would say my upbringing was semi-religious, in the sense that my mother was from a Christian family, and my grandmother used to go to church every Sunday. So if my grandma was in town, so my grandma would come. She has a daughter in Switzerland, and then she had my mother in England. So she would always travel in between Switzerland for a couple months, England for a couple months, and then be in the Gambia for the rest of the time where she comes from. So whenever my grandma was around, she would take me to church. Every Sunday, if my grandma's in London and she stays with us for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, every Sunday I go to church with her. They put me in Sunday school. I learned and I read Bible stories. And I was somebody that was very interested in reading and understanding and all of those things anyway. So just being young and going to Sunday school, the stories fascinated me. Reading the Bible and stories for kids and watching all the movies and stuff, it was something that I grew up believing in God, being taught that God existed, and, going to church and understanding the role of prophecy and prophets and Jesus and Moses and Abraham, alayhi salam. From a young age, I was raised in that. Even though I wouldn't describe my family as particularly religious per se, like there wasn't anything that was kind of off limits for us in terms of the way we lived our lives, compared to, like, when you hear about people who grew up in religious families, usually it's like, oh, we weren't allowed to do this, or we weren't allowed to do that, or we had these kind of restrictions. My family is very free, we're very open, we're very liberal. But at the same time, there was a strong belief in God, as I feel is present with most West African families. There was a strong belief in God. There was this, cultural importance placed on attending church, especially for the ethnic group that my mom comes from. She's a Creole. So Creoles, as I mentioned earlier, the liberated African communities, their communities in Sierra Leone and in the Gambia are strongly based around church. So even if you're not religious per se, church attendance is more of a social event, because that's where you'll see all of your cousins, that's where you'll see all of your friends, that's where you'll link up with all of the people in the community. And especially in the Gambia, where the Creole community is a minority community, like I know there's only a couple of churches. There was the Methodist church in Banjul, which we were part of. My great-grandfather used to play the organ in that church, etc. Then they had the other church in Bakau, another Methodist church in Bakau. And those were the two churches really that all of my relatives and my family went to. So when I'm in Gambia, I was in those churches. When I was in the UK, there were a few Methodist churches that we would go to. And so, yeah, being a Creole, like going to church was a big thing. It's a big part of our culture. So I was raised in that kind of environment.
Right. So, I mean, but your mother's Muslim, right? Or is she Christian? She Christian?
No, she's Christian. Yeah. She's Christian.
She's still Christian. Okay. And so that means that you're a convert.
Yes.
What doesn't mean that? Yeah. I mean, what about your father? Your father was Muslim, right?
My father's Catholic, 100% Catholic.
No, I thought, okay, this whole time I'm saying to myself, okay, your father's Muslim. You know, I'm pretty sure about that.
My father's, so his family, as I mentioned earlier, they're from this ethnic group. So they follow a traditional religion, which was called the oh God, I forgot what it was called. The Ekpe. Ekpe was their traditional religion. And then his grandfather was the first one to become Catholic when the missionaries arrived, and he started as the king of the area, interacting with the colonial missionaries. So he established the first church and he established the first school in the area, but he was still practicing his traditional religion as well. So like even my father, all of his brothers, they were all initiated into the traditional religious rites, but they also attended secondary school and they also attended Catholic school and all of those kind of things. Now they're 100% practicing Catholics, and then I'm the first Muslim in my father's line of the family. And
okay, so you became Muslim, right? So you converted when? How old were you when you converted?
I converted when I was 13. I converted in 2007.
You're early. MashaAllah.
Yeah. I've been Muslim for a minute, but
right. So I imagine that you interact with Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse from time to time.
From time to time, yeah. I do visit him in Liverpool occasionally. Alhamdulillah.
He's also a Nigerian, right? That's what I understand. He's Nigerian.
Yeah, he's from the other side of Nigeria. I'm from the east, he's from the west.
Oh, okay. So all right. So your Islamic education, you know, I mean, when you became Muslim, you said 2007, right? 2007, become Muslim. Then eventually, of course, I would imagine that you start to study Islam more seriously. You know, what sort of institutions, if at all, like the private study, things like that. What areas would you say that you excelled at in your studies?
So I took Shahada 2007, and I took Shahada through the guidance of a man called Sheikh Hassan Cisse, who was a Senegalese Islamic scholar. And Sheikh Hassan Cisse had a niece in the UK called Aisha Cisse, and a nephew who was her husband, Sheikh Khalil Nyas. They had a Quranic school in their house. It started off in their house, in their apartment, and then as it grew bigger, it became like a fully fledged madrasa. But it was like a traditional West African Islamic school just in the UK. And so the main teacher was the lady, Sayyidah Aisha. And so she kind of taught me the alphabet, the Quranic alphabet, Alif, Ba, Ta, Sa. I learned my first Ahzab of Quran from her in Warsh and Hafs and everything. And I started memorizing Quran there in the house. Every weekend I was there with them. And that's where I picked up on the Wolof language as well and all of that. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I wanted to learn the Arabic language because I would attend gatherings whenever the Sheikh would come from Senegal, whenever the teachers would come from West Africa. There'll be gatherings that take place in which they'll recite poetry, they'll recite qasidas, they'll recite all of these different things in Arabic that even though we were reciting and singing along, I didn't understand the meaning. And I could see that the meaning would be moving people, but it wouldn't move me because I didn't know what was being said. So my curiosity kind of pushed me to say, okay, I want to go past just the route memorization and reading and being able to read and recite and to be able to understand the Arabic language properly. And so there was an organization at the time called Ibn Jabal Institute, which used to teach Arabic. Now it's called Arabica Institute. And so I signed up for their course. I was about 16. I was in middle school then, if you call it middle school or high school, I don't know. And so that's where I started to study Arabic language. And I did Nahu, I did Sarf, I did a bit of everything. I even got to level 3, which was Balagha. And then that's when I applied to go to college, university. And so when the university application time came in, I chose to study Arabic and international relations. It was a double major. So half of my modules were in the Arabic language, and then the other half were in international relations. And I did that for years until I graduated in 2017. And then I did my master's. And then all throughout that time, because I had these connections to Senegal and then via Senegal to Mauritania, every summer, every Easter holiday, every Christmas holiday, I would travel back to West Africa and sit with the Sheikh. So I would travel to Mauritania. I started traveling to Mauritania 2014, and I go every year since then. Senegal, I started to travel there 2009 was my first time, and I would go since then. Gambia as well. My grandmother lived in Gambia, so I would always be there every December, and I would sit with the Sheikh there. There was an imam in the masjid. There was a masjid called Pipeline Mosque, which is down the road from my house in Fajara. There was a imam there called Imam Fallou Diouf. I used to sit with him and study some books with him. I was always like, anytime I had spare time that I wasn't in school, I would go to Africa if I could, study and come back. So it was.
I noticed that. Yeah, a lot of your posts, I look at it, man, this guy is everywhere. Every time I look, you in a different country, and particularly in African countries, you're all over the place. I say, alhamdulillah, I like to see that. Obviously, did you ever finish memorizing the Quran? Or just,
No, I never finished memorizing the Quran yet, inshallah. We're still working on it, inshallah. You might get
inshallah. Yeah. So every time you go to Mauritania or these other places, you go sit down with shuyukh, you sit maybe study a book with them and things like that.
Yeah. So, the books they're always small and you can memorize them in a short.
Well, alhamdulillah. Yeah, mashallah. It's just what method? Do you have a method or no?
Yeah, Maliki.
I thought so. Alhamdulillah. I said you better be Nigerian.
وفي طريقة الجنيد السالك.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I saw somewhere that I wanted to talk a little about Beyond Bilal, but before that, I saw somewhere where you actually wrote a couple other books. I think there are 2 other books that maybe you published, or maybe they're supposed to be published. Is that true, or I don't remember the titles?
So Beyond Bilal was the first book that I've published.
And oh, really? Okay.
Just in Rabi al-Awwal, I did a translation of I called it the Rabi readings. So the collection of qasaid, different poems that are recited in Senegal and in Mauritania during the Rabi al-Awwal month, the month where the Prophet ﷺ was born, just commemorating him and talking about his life and his qasaids, etc. And it was a collection of poetry that was recited and compiled by Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. So that's the second book. And then Beyond Bilal Part 2 is coming out very soon, inshallah. So that's the third, I would say. The second book, it was more of a free online publication. I'm uploading it onto Amazon soon. I just want to add some more qasa'id to the book and kind of flesh it out and make it worth people's money when they purchase it. So I'm adding more poems into that and more translations. But it's part of that project of translating traditional West African Islamic text that I feel are underrepresented in, the English translation world of Islamic literature. Yeah. But those are the 3 that should be out by the end of the year. I should have Beyond Bilal already is out. Then the Rabi reading should be out soon. And Beyond Bilal Part 2 is coming out very soon, within the next week, inshallah.
Right. Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. That's cool. So Beyond Bilal. Now, of course, from the title, I know from just following your posts about your different trips and your presentations about this, exactly what you're trying to get at, but why don't you, for the purpose of the podcast itself, maybe explain to some listeners who are unaware, I'm not familiar with, what this particular book is all about and what incentivized you to actually write it.
So Beyond Bilal, it was the fruit of a group of discussions that were happening in the British Muslim community around the years 2017 to 2018. There was a radio interview that took place with a friend of mine called Najwa Sharif, or Najwa Noor, and she was a Black Muslim girl. She was on this BBC podcast or radio show, and she mentioned something about being Muslim. And so the person said to her, "Oh, wait, are you Muslim? And then she said, yeah, of course I'm Muslim. And then they're like, oh, but you're black. How can you be black and Muslim? Because in people's minds, those were two, things that didn't go together.
Oil and water. It felt like they don't go together. Yeah. Oil and water. Yeah.
Exactly. So that sparked a whole debate on social media, which then came into the university scene, and there were a lot of events being held about representation and black Muslims and, the representation of black Muslims in Muslim spaces and in non-Muslim spaces. And at that time, I had just finished my bachelor's program. And in the Arabic and International Relations degree that I did my dissertation on Arabic literature and literacy in West Africa. Because I had grown up in that West African Muslim community, I was exposed to a side of Islamic literature and Arabic literature that I didn't see represented anywhere else. And so when it came time to write about something, I chose to write about that for my thesis, for my university. And so some of my friends knew about that. And so when they were organizing some of these events and some of these lectures, at that time I was doing my master's degree at SOAS in translation, and they invited me to speak on some of these panels about my experience as a black Muslim, because they felt it was a unique experience. Because for most Muslims, especially converts in the West and in London in particular, we're given this kind of Islam that's either very Arab or very Asian. And we're not taught Islam in a way that it includes our history or our kind of trajectory in the development of Islam.
Right.
No, since the spread of Islam and the spread of the madhahib and the spread of the ulama, Islam has been established in West Africa for over 1,000 years. And so it's produced its own scholarship, it's produced its own flavor, it's produced its own contribution to the Muslim world, as the Middle East has, as Asia has, as all of the other places in the Muslim world have. Yet the type of Islam and the scholarship that we're exposed to is very linear, and it's very from a particular region and a particular cultural subset. And so for me to be able to have access to this different side of the Islamic tradition, it was something that, my friends wanted me to share with people. So I started doing these small kind of talks here and there, MSAs, and then it kind of evolved into me giving a presentation at Oxford University called Beyond Bilal, Blackness and Islam, and talking about, because the theme that people wanted to talk about when it came to being black and Muslim, for me, it just felt like it was just about, let me just complain about my experience as a black Muslim. Like I went to the and this happened to me, or someone said this racist thing to me, or someone did this to me, or I feel like this, or I feel like that, which are all valid. But at the same time, I felt like, let's raise the conversation a little higher. Do you realize that there is black history in Islam? Do you realize that there's a connection between the history of Islam and the history of Africa, or the history of Islam and the history of black people as a whole? And so just drawing the dots in between these two things and exposing people to a side of history that they didn't know from the tafsir, from the hadith, and from the Quran, and from, the works of the traditional scholars that we have, such as Jalaluddin Suyuti in his book, al-Hajj, or Rafu Shan al-Habshan of Ibn Jawzi, and all these kind of books. I just wanted to show people a different side of Islamic scholarship and the connections between black history and Islam.
Right.
And so that was a presentation that I was running from 2018 till 2022. Essentially, I was going on tour with it. I went to the States. I did 7 of the 8 Ivy League universities with this tour. I went to Oxford. I went to Cambridge. I went to 20 universities in the UK in 1 month with this tour. And then it kept on evolving and evolving, and people kept on asking me to make it into a book. And so I finally sat down. COVID gave me the opportunity to actually sit down and not have to go anywhere. And I kind of tried to compile it into a book, and then I've released that book. And then I had 2 more one was called The Black History in the Arab World, and then the other one was called Africans in Asia. And it was about the history of African Muslims in Asia and in the subcontinent. And so that's what the second book is going to focus on more. So the second book is called Beyond Bilal, Black Muslims in the East. And it's going to focus on that side of the history, inshallah, as well, which is, interesting.
Yeah, mashallah. So what type of reception would you say you received? Yeah, I mean, what we had, overall? I mean, was there any level of resistance that, you received? I imagine it probably would have been a small amount of resistance, if any.
I feel like there was a small amount of resistance, but generally, I would say it was 95% acceptance and maybe 5% resistance. And the 5% resistance that I did face, I don't even really acknowledge it or like really even know where it wasn't even that much of an impact, because people were loving the book so much and loving the information. And because I had already kind of, like, when I was writing the book, my wife was like, "Are you sure you want to say this? Are you sure you want to put this out there?" I was like, "Yeah." But I just made sure that everything that I said, I made sure I showed where I got it from. I made sure I referenced it either from the Quran or from the Ahadith or from the ulama. So the book is not a Mustafa Briggs said book. It's the Quran says this, the Tafasir say this. The Ahadith say this, the Sharh says this. Ibn Hajar says this, Jalaluddin Suyuti says this, Jahid says this, Tabari says this, and Mustafa Briggs combined it and put it in the book. You read it. If you accept it, you accept it. If you don't, your beef is with them. Right. That's how I presented the book, you know. And then the rest of it is history, which no one can deny history, you know. So with Beyond Bilal, for example, it's 5 chapters. The first chapter deals with Black history in the Quran, and that's solely based on the tafsir of the traditional scholars and where I can kind of extract Black history or what's relevant to Black history through tafsir. Then the second chapter deals with Black history around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so I talk about the Black Sahaba as mentioned in the books of Ibn Jawzi and Jalaluddin Suyuti. Then the third chapter deals with the history of Islam in West Africa, which is history. No one can deny history. The fourth chapter deals with the history of Islam in the Americas, which is also history. And then the fifth chapter deals with female scholarship within the Islamic tradition generally and the African tradition specifically, which is also history again. So, you know, the only pushback maybe that I would have got is, oh, why are you focusing on this subject? But if you're not a victim of the struggle that brought about the book, then you won't really understand the reason why this book needs to be made. But for people who live their lives as Black Muslims or, you know, had that experience, then they understand exactly why this book needs to be made. And this book is for them. It's not for anyone else.
Right, exactly. MashaAllah. Yeah, well said. I like to shift this a little bit. You had mentioned earlier, I think as you mentioned, Khalil Nyas, I believe this is the name of a family member of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. So you had mentioned prior to us starting this particular interview that you wanted to speak a little bit about Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. And of course, a lot of people know who he is, especially if you follow the Tijani Tariqa. And a lot of even Black Americans have come to know who he is, you know. But for the sake of the audience, why don't you give us some background about who the Sheikh was? Right.
Yeah, so Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse,
yes,
may Allah have mercy on him, was a Senegalese West African scholar born in 1900 in the Kaolack region of Senegal. And his father was an anti-colonial warrior called al-Hajj Abdullah Nyas. He was also a scholar. He was also a Qadi. He was a judge. He was also somebody that was traveled within the Muslim world. He left Senegal and he traveled to Morocco, where he received some ijazat in knowledge and in tasawwuf. He traveled to Egypt, where he received some ijazat from the scholars of Al-Azhar. He traveled to Mecca, to Medina in the early 1900s, and he came back to Senegal. He was known for, you know, his knowledge of tafsir. He was also known for his jihad efforts against the French and his anti-colonial fighting, which led him to move to the Gambia, where Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse grew up. So Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, even though he was born in Senegal, he spent the first 11 years of his life in the Gambia before returning to Senegal to complete his education with his father. And Sheikh Ibrahim was somebody of such immense knowledge and such immense spirituality. And the reason why I find him such an amazing figure was that even though he had no formal education in the sense that he didn't go to any of the major universities in the Islamic world, he wasn't an Azhar graduate or a Zaytuna graduate or a Qaraween graduate or even a Timbuktu Sankore University graduate. Everything he learned with his father. And he said he never, after the day his father passed away, when he was 22 years old, Sheikh Ibrahim was 22 years old, he never studied with anybody after his father. But he was somebody that was recognized for his knowledge to such a level that he started to gather students from Mauritania in his late 20s. And if you know the relationship between Senegal and Mauritania, there's scholars from Mauritania that when they go to Senegal, they don't even pray behind black people in Senegal, let alone to come and study with a Senegalese person because of the knowledge that they had. People who are from tribes such as the Dawa Ali and the Dawa Yaqub, who trace their ancestry back to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and who were the people who spread Islam in the region, were coming to study with Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse in his village in the early 20s. Then in the 30s, he started to travel. He went on Hajj for the first time in 1937 after he established his own village, Medina, in 1930. And that's when he started to attract students from Nigeria, which we know in West Africa was the center of Islamic learning. The Emir of Kano met him on Hajj in 1937 and decided to become his student and invited him to Nigeria. The same thing with, not only did he meet the Emir of Kano, but he met prominent individuals such as Amin al-Husseini, who became the Mufti of Palestine. He met Izzat Darwaza. He met all of these kind of influential people who were going to become influential in the Arab world. He met them during this Hajj. He met the royal family of Saudi Arabia, who were impressed with his knowledge as well. He gave a speech in front of King Fahad at the time, who, you know, invited him back as a guest of the king. And then in the 50s and the 60s, you start to see his influence expand more in West Africa. So from a tariqa perspective, he was a Tijani and he practiced, you know, the Tijani tariqa. And I think that's the lens that a lot of people look at him through. But for me, as a student of international relations and as a student of knowledge as well, I like to look at him through a different lens and through his international relations lens, which I find just as, if not more impressive. Because this is somebody that in the 50s and in the 60s, he's campaigning for the end of colonialism, and he's working with people like Kwame Nkrumah, who were not even Muslim, to forward the advancement of Pan-African politics in West Africa and uniting and causing the Muslims in Ghana to support Kwame Nkrumah's movement to allow Ghana to become independent. In Nigeria, he was involved in, you know, ending colonialism there and different disputes that were happening, the Biafra War, all of these kind of things. He was involved politically. He was somebody that was involved in the Palestinian struggle. He was close to Hajj Amin al-Husseini. He traveled to Palestine a lot and he campaigned for the rights of Palestinians, and he raised awareness for the Palestinian cause in West Africa. He was somebody that 1964, King Faisal invited him to become one of the founding members and the vice president of the Muslim World League. And there were only 7 founding members at the time. Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse was one of them. The Muslim World Congress in Pakistan with Maulana Maududi, he was a part of that. He even traveled to China in 1964 and he had a meeting with Zhao Enlai, who was the premier of communist China at that time. And they were talking about Islam in Africa and the different, you know, politics and global politics at a time when Senegal didn't even have a diplomatic mission in China. And this was all through his religious knowledge, his religious scholarship, and his religious diplomacy. This was somebody who traveled throughout Europe in the 60s. This was somebody who traveled to places that we didn't even know or hear about. There were places I didn't know about in the world until I read them in Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse's book that he traveled to through Dawah and through all these different things. And then he's somebody that has left such a major impact on the Muslim world in ways that we know and in ways that we don't know. So, for example, recently documents have come out about his involvement in helping the King of Morocco re-establish himself as the king after the French had exiled him to Madagascar. Sheikh Ibrahim was the only one given permission by the French government to visit King Hassan II in Father Mohammed V in Madagascar. He was part of those kind of diplomatic negotiations. All of these different things that were happening. And then even if we look at scholarship in the world today, it's very interesting to note that, for example, in West Africa alone, the Mufti of Nigeria, Sheikh Ibrahim Saleh Husseini, was a student of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. I've sat with him many times here in Cairo. He has a house here. He has many students here. And he is somebody that he's a proud student of Sheikh Ibrahim. And not only that, but the Mufti of Chad is his student. He has a large following in Sudan as well. He has students across the Arab world in different places. All of that can be traced to Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse's silsila. So I've seen, for example, Habib Ali go to visit Sharif Ibrahim Saleh Husseini, sit on the floor, Sheikh Ibrahim Saleh sitting on the chair, teaching hadith, giving them ijazat that come from Sheikh Ibrahim. I have a teacher myself, Muhammad Al-Khamis Sulaiman, who teaches in al-Mustafa in Yemen. He's also taught in India and different places. He's a student of Sheikh Ibrahim Saleh Al-Husseini. and he teaches the family of Habib Omar in Tarim. And so you see like the circles of knowledge just outside of Tariqa, just in fiqh, in hadith, in all of these different, in Mauritania, one of the biggest scholars that we have in Mauritania called Muhammad Hassan al-Ahmed al-Khadim. He was the person who gave Sheikh Hamza the ijazah for the book Purification of the Heart. And when Sheikh Hamza was studying, he studied it from his commentary. He's a student of one of the students of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, the Mufti of the Chief Imam of Ghana, Sheikh Usman Sharbutu, was a student of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. In the Gambia, Chief Imam of Gambia today, Imam Cherno Maska, his father was a student of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. Most of the royal families in northern Nigeria, all of these different places, you see the influence of his scholarship, and as one person to have affected thousands of people who go on to affect thousands of people. I feel as though that's a very, very important person for us to know in Muslim history, and so in Black history and African history, that there were African scholars as late as 1975 who had impacted the world and continue to impact the world in that way. And I feel like that's an underrepresented side of scholarship that it deserves to be known. And just not looking at scholars from one angle. So for many people, even when you Wikipedia and you type in Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse's name, the first thing that comes up is his Sufi affiliations or his spiritual side. Nobody talks about his politics. Nobody talks about his scholarship. Nobody talks about his network of students. Nobody talks about his political justice. And these are things that are just as important, if not more important, than those things, because they're just as relevant or even more relevant to modern society than the spiritual aspect. Because spirituality is meant to transform into you having the grounding to establish khilafah in the earth and to fight for justice in the earth, and how your interaction, once you know Allah, then your interaction with the creation of Allah, how does that manifest? And so if we know that the tariqah and the spirituality is a path for you to know Allah, when you have that knowledge of Allah, how does that manifest in your actions? When you look at Sheikh Ibrahim's actions and how he dealt with global politics at the time and how he dealt with the Muslim world at the time and the issues that the Muslim world were facing, I feel like all of that is an interesting study, a case study, and how the authenticity of African scholarship was able to do that. This is somebody that studied in a small village in Senegal, but when he went to al-Azhar, which was the center of Islamic learning in the Arab world, they allowed him not only to become a member of the board of the scholars of al-Azhar, but he also was one of the first non-Azharis to lead Salatul Jummah in al-Azhar Mosque in 1962, I believe. So all of these things are aspects of me that I think need to be, explored and spoken about. Yeah. And then being able to have the privilege to have studied with his children and his grandchildren. I took Shahada with his grandson. I studied Quran with his granddaughter. I studied books with his sons, and I've received ijazah from his sons. That's something that I prize highly in my own spiritual development. Yeah.
Right. MashaAllah, that's powerful, very powerful. Yeah. I was hoping that you would get into a little bit more than just the Sufism, because I'm just thinking about
Sufism at all.
No, it's I think that when I look at a lot of at least the small number of Africans or sub-Saharan African scholars that I have read things about, that typically you find, of course, Sufism aspect is highlighted, Sufism, and but the Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, his books, they're all written in Arabic. It's very eloquent. He wrote poetry. And people have to understand it, to be able to write poetry in the Arabic language itself, that itself means that you have a high level of proficiency in the language. You can't just sort of, you can go and dibble, with it a little bit, but that doesn't make you sort of, really adept at it, right? It's like, I was telling the students the other day the story about Bilal ibn Rabah, whereas Muslims have this misunderstanding that Bilal ibn Rabah struggled to speak Arabic, because there's the hadith, the fabricated hadith, which was reported that Bilal, when he tried to say sheen, he would say seen, right? Instead of saying ashhadu, he said ashhadu, right? And there's the hadith that mentions that the Prophet ﷺ supposedly said that Bilal seen the sheen with Allah, right? But that hadith is fabricated, but Bilal himself, he was born and raised in Arabia, Right? Yeah. So there's little reason to even believe to expect that he would have an accent, right? You're born in that environment, and then on top of that, Bilal has his poetry too. Bilal the Brahma has poetry, right? In the Arabic, and again, since Arabic is our lingua franca, right? For religion, I mean, it's our devotional language, and so you have a scholar. He's not just from Africa. He's not just a Sufi. He actually is proficient in the Arabic language. He's written multiple books. I've written maybe about 75 books, he's written. He's well connected politically. He's dealing with all of these he's very highly influential as a diplomat. He's influencing all these people. He's very close relationship with these scholars of Azhar, traveled Morocco, Tunisia. I mean, all these other places, right? It's really amazing, that we know very little about such a person, and, so I'm really glad that we have people like yourself, who are able to highlight his contributions in this fashion so eloquently, to do so. And we hope that it will lead to more people to look into not only works by Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, but even other African scholars, because there is, we can see a different experience with Islam that Africans have, which have led to a different even reaction to, I guess you could say, non-Muslim culture and civilization, right? Because one example I often like to give is that when we look to the East, when it comes to living side by side with non-Muslims or living under Muslim rule, that the Eastern scholars, many of them, they struggle. Listen, you have to either revolt, overthrow them, or, just be patient for a little time, but then, we always, the idea is it's a revolt against them. There's no other sort of way around it, but take a country like Senegal, who I believe the first president was Christian, right? And then they lived under that person for 30 years, right? And it didn't cause any really major consternation as a result of it. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the ideal that should be everywhere, but I'm saying, but we had to ask, it said something about the culture and about the attitudes and about the sense of, I guess you say, the trust and harmony that that the Africans, West Africans, and Sub-Saharan Africans are able to sort of to muster up, or to to muster in order to sort of live with other people, coexist with other people. So coexistence doesn't always have to be in the state of conflict, permanent conflict. That we can find some common ground at times and tolerate one another. It doesn't have to lead to bloodshed. Whereas if we were to continue with the other perspective, then we will see over and over and over, what we have seen even in recent times. So, but that's just my perspective on the issue. But is there anything else you'd like to conclude with? You'd like to mention or state any advice for the audience?
I would say, continuing from what you said, I remember I was speaking to a particular scholar, and they said something really interesting to me. They said, it's important for us in the West, as Western Muslims, to explore how Islam manifested itself in the African continent, because Islam in the West comes to the West through Africa. It doesn't come through any other African. We look at how Islam entered into Europe, for example. Everyone speaks about the Andalusian period and the golden age of, the Moors in Spain and Portugal. But that was an African movement. It started in the Niger, the Senegal River Valley and North Africa. And so the people that went on to establish the Al-Murabitun, who then went on to kind of expand into Al-Andalus and make that region flourish, that began in Africa and spread out. Then if we think about the North America and South Americas, the first Muslims there were West African Muslims. And then after the West African Muslims and the people of West African descent, such as the African American Muslims who were returning to Islam in the 20s and the 30s, until the change in the Immigration Act in the 60s, which then allowed everyone else to come in. All of these then established the fact that Islam, as it spread from Arabia through Africa, from Africa came into the West. There's a lot of issues that we're facing with our practice in Islam in the West might have solutions in the West African and the North African manifestations of Islam. And that's something we've seen, for example, with the work of Zaytuna, with the work of Sheikh Hamza going to West Africa, studying and coming back, and he was able to change in the society and in the community, and what all of these scholars who have traveled and come back have been able to do. As you're looking at examples and case studies, such as, for example, coexistence, living alongside non-Muslims, living under non-Muslim rule, and then looking at how that manifested in traditional West African societies and how then we can take lessons from that female and male interaction in West African and North African communities. All of these different things, there's lessons for each and every one of us from all of these different cultures and understandings, because Allah tells us in the Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, that He made us into tribes and nations in order for us to know each other. If we think back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during his time he had the Arabs that he came from, and then he had different people that came in from different societies and contributed. So he had Bilal. Well, Bilal was Arab anyway through his father, but if we call Bilal Habashi, or even the other As-Sahaba that came from Habash directly through Najashi that weren't part of, Bilal, then we had Suhaib al-Rumi and we had, Salman al-Farsi. If we think about the Battle of Khandaq, when they had a particular strategy that they wanted to take into place, and then one of the Sahaba, when he said, can I suggest something to you? Is this wahi or is this an idea? If it's wahi, then I won't oppose. But if it's an idea, I also have an idea. The Prophet said, what's your idea? He said, well, in my country where I come from, we build ditches. They built the ditch. So the Prophet participated in building the ditch with him, and they were able to win that battle because of that perspective from his history, his culture, and his understanding that Allah brought him to the Prophet in order for his particular identity and his particular contribution to be able to contribute to the overall well-being of Islam. The spread of Islam through all of the continents, through all of the cultures, through all of the different histories is something that brings us all together so that we can contribute to the spread of Islam through us being able to interact with each other and learn from each other and understand each other and take knowledge and wisdom from each other. And so in order for us to be able to do that, we have to understand the histories and the cultures that we come from and what those can contribute to the development of the Ummah and to the development of moving Islam forward. And so, I think all of the work that is being done in this regard, not just in my side from the West African aspect, but also if you see other scholars talking from the European aspect, bringing in Asian aspect, Southeast Asian, subcontinent, I feel like we're coming into an age when a lot of people are now moving into trying to understand how Islam has manifested in their particular regions and how Islam should manifest in regions that Islam hasn't manifested in yet, such as the UK and USA, in order for us to bring new ways and trajectories for us to push the message of the Prophet ﷺ forward. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what, this unveils as time goes on, inshallah.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. I really appreciate that. This is a fascinating discussion, and looking forward to having more conversations with you like this in the future, inshallah. We really appreciate you taking the time out your busy schedule to come up here on our podcast. Mustafa Briggs, barakallahu feek, I really appreciate it. Allah continue to bless you and increase you, protect your family, and allow for you to continue to grant us information and benefit for the Ummah and for the world, inshallah. Okay, so with that, alhamdulillah, we've concluded this episode. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He bless you and keep you with us over the coming weeks. We at Lampos, the Lampos Education Initiative, we are hoping that we continue to provide you with the best quality presentations as possible for the Ummah to reunite us with our Prophet and with our Deen. This is Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali with Talking with Teachers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you. See you in the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We hope you liked this episode. This podcast has been brought to you by the Lampos Education Initiative. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can find other important links in the description down below. Please support us. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.